Gerald Marsh grabbed the transfer file and signed it without reading a single line. He had already made his decision 3 weeks ago, in a closed-door meeting that never appeared on any official calendar. He stamped the authorization, slid it across the desk, and said 4 words that would destroy a living creature who had saved 17 American lives. Schedule the dog's removal. Not retirement, not reassignment. Removal. The same dog that dragged a wounded soldier out of enemy fire. The same dog that found a buried IED before it killed an entire convoy. Gone because one man decided a loyal soldier was now an inconvenient problem. Drop your city in the comments right now. I want to see how far this story travels. Subscribe and stay until the very end, because what Marsh never counted on was the one person on Earth who knew exactly what he had done. The morning Avery Collins arrived at Naval Special Warfare Center in Coronado, California, the temperature was already climbing toward 84 degrees before 8 o'clock, and the kind of dry coastal heat that settles into your bones had already taken hold of the base. She drove herself. No escort, no assistant, just a government-issued truck with a single duffel bag in the back and a manila folder of transfer orders sitting on the passenger seat beside her. She had read those orders so many times that she knew them word for word, but she read them one more time before stepping out of the truck, not because she needed to remember them, but because she needed to prepare herself for what came next. She already knew what she was walking into. She had been transferred into SEAL Team 7's support unit, designated as the primary K-9 integration specialist for a program that had been struggling for almost 2 years. The official language in the orders was clean and professional, but Avery had spent enough time inside classified military programs to read what lived between the lines of official language, and what she read there was something far less clean. She was not being welcomed. She was being tested. Avery Collins stood 5 feet 7 inches tall. She had dark hair she kept pulled back so tightly it looked almost severe. She had brown eyes that people sometimes described as quiet, which was not a compliment in most military circles, where noise and confidence and volume were mistaken for competence every single day. She had been a K-9 specialist for 7 years. Before that, 2 years of overseas deployment in a joint task force role that most people on this base were not cleared to know about. She had citations that were classified. She had commendations that had never been printed on paper. And she had a history with a dog that nobody on this base knew existed. She picked up her duffel bag. She walked through the gate. The guard checked her credentials with the flat professionalism of someone who processed hundreds of entries every day. But even he gave her a second look. Not disrespectful, just curious, like he was trying to figure out what category she fit into and was coming up empty. "Welcome to the center, Lieutenant Collins." "Thank you," she said, and kept walking. The SEAL Team's operations building was a gray concrete structure that sat at the eastern edge of the base. It was not impressive from the outside. Most of the things that happened inside it never made it into any official report. Avery had done her research. She knew the team's deployment history, their training records, their leadership structure. She knew that Master Chief Nathan Walker had been running this unit for 6 years, and that in those 6 years he had earned a reputation as one of the most effective and most stubborn men in the entire Naval Special Warfare Command. She knocked on the door of his office before entering. He did not look up from the papers on his desk. "Collins," he said, not as a greeting, more like confirmation that a problem had arrived. "Master Chief," she said. He looked up then. He was 51 years old with gray at his temples and a jaw that looked like it had been carved from something harder than bone. His eyes were light blue and completely unreadable, which Avery had been told was one of his defining traits. He assessed her the way she imagined he assessed every situation, quickly, systematically, and without emotion. "Sit down," he said. She sat. He slid the transfer orders across the desk toward her, as if she hadn't already memorized them. "You want to tell me what this is about?" he asked. "My orders say K-9 integration support," she said. "I can read, Lieutenant. I'm asking you what this is actually about." She looked at him steadily. "I was assigned to evaluate the K-9 program here and determine why Titan is no longer operational." Nathan Walker leaned back in his chair. Something moved across his face, not quite a smile, not quite contempt, but something that contained elements of both. "Titan," he said, as if the word itself were mildly amusing. "They sent you here for Titan." "Yes, Master Chief." "Do you know what Titan is?" He's a Belgian Malinois, 7 years old, former. He is 112 pounds of unpredictable, aggressive, handler-breaking military working dog who has put 3 men in medical and is currently scheduled for removal from service in 18 days. Nathan Walker said every word with the calm of someone stating obvious facts to someone who hadn't grasped them yet. He is not a project, Lieutenant. He is a liability. Avery said nothing. Is there something about that statement that you'd like to challenge? He asked. No, Master Chief. Good. He stood up. Sergeant Ramirez will show you to your quarters. The K-9 facility is on the south side of the compound. You will not approach Titan's enclosure without authorization. You will not interact with him without a handler present. And you will read every incident report in his file before you even look at him through a window. Are we clear? Yes, Master Chief. He picked up his papers again. The meeting was over. Avery stood, picked up her duffel, and walked to the door. She stopped with her hand on the frame and said, without turning around, how long have you believed that strength is the only thing that matters in military working dog programs? The silence that followed lasted exactly 4 seconds. She counted them. Dismissed, Lieutenant, Nathan Walker said. She walked out. Sergeant Cole Ramirez was waiting in the hallway. He was 34 years old, built like someone who had been engineered rather than raised. And he had the kind of easy physical confidence that comes from spending years in environments where your body is your most important tool. He looked at Avery the way most of the men on this base would look at her, not hostile exactly, but assessing, measuring, waiting to be proven right about whatever he had already decided. I'm Ramirez, he said. I know, she said. That surprised him. He raised an eyebrow. You do research before you show up to a new assignment? I do research before I do anything, she said. He almost smiled. Not quite, but almost. He fell into step beside her as they moved down the corridor. Walker wasn't exactly rolling out the welcome mat in there. I noticed. He doesn't like command decisions he didn't make. Most effective leaders don't, she said. It doesn't mean they're wrong. Ramirez glanced at her sideways. You're defending the man who just basically told you to stay in your lane? I'm acknowledging that he has reasons for the way he operates. That's different from agreeing with him. They pushed through the exterior door and stepped into the heat. Ramirez pointed toward the south end of the compound, and they walked in that direction. The sounds of the base surrounded them: vehicles, equipment, voices from distant training areas, the rhythmic percussion of a world built entirely around readiness. So you're here for Titan, Ramirez said. You read his file? Parts of it. Then you know what he did to Harris. She was quiet for a moment. I read the incident report. Harris had 6 years of canine handling experience. Titan put him down in about 4 seconds. Ramirez said it flatly, not dramatizing it, just stating it the way soldiers state things that have settled into fact. The dog before that was Morrison. Morrison had 8 years. Same result. Titan doesn't discriminate. It's not about experience with him. It's about trust, Avery said. Ramirez stopped walking, just for a moment. Then he kept moving. What? Titan doesn't react to experience. He reacts to whether he trusts the person in front of him. Those are two very different things. Ramirez looked at her again with the same sideways assessment. You got that from his file? I got that from 7 years of working with military dogs, she said. He was quiet for a moment. Then the team thinks this assignment is a mistake. I'm not trying to be harsh. I'm just telling you what you're walking into. I appreciate that, she said, and she meant it. How many men on your team have seen Titan in person? All of them. How many went into his enclosure? Another pause. None of them. After Morrison, Walker restricted access. Only the K-9 staff goes near him now, and they only go near him with barriers. She nodded slowly. And the removal order. Who initiated it? Command. Walker signed off on it, but the original recommendation came from the base K-9 program director. Ramirez pushed open a chain-link gate at the south end of the compound. Dr. Gerald Marsh. He's the one who made the call. Avery filed that name away. The K-9 facility came into view, and even from 40 yards, she could feel it. The way you can sometimes feel a room before you walk into it. A kind of atmospheric weight that exists in spaces where something significant happened. You don't have to go in today, Ramirez said. Nobody's expecting you to. I know, she said. She kept walking toward it anyway. Gerald Marsh was waiting at the facility entrance, and within 30 seconds of meeting him, Avery understood exactly what kind of man he was. He was 62, with reading glasses pushed up on his forehead and the practiced warmth of someone who had learned long ago that warmth was a useful professional tool. He shook her hand with both of his. He smiled with the full architecture of a smile, eyes, cheeks, the whole structure. And he said how pleased he was to have an expert joining the team, how valuable her perspective would be, how much he admired the K-9 integration work being done at other installations. He did not mention Titan for the first 4 minutes. The facility has 16 active working dogs, he said, walking her through the outer area. 14 are fully operational. One is in recovery from a minor injury. And one in enclosure 7, Avery said. Marsh stopped. That same flicker that crossed Nathan Walker's face, the slight recalibration that happens when someone realizes they are dealing with a person who did their homework. Yes, he said carefully. Titan is in enclosure 7. Can I see him? Of course. Though I want to give you some context first about the behavioral progression we've observed. I'd like to see him now, Dr. Marsh, and then hear the context. Avery said, not sharp, not challenging, just clear. The kind of clear that doesn't invite argument. Marsh studied her for a moment. Then he nodded. Of course. They walked through the facility. The 14 active working dogs were in their enclosures alert, watchful, some of them rising to their feet as she passed, ears forward, reading her the way dogs read everything, with a thoroughness that no human could match. She looked at each of them briefly. She knew how to move through a canine facility. She knew how to make herself readable to animals who spent their whole lives interpreting human signals. She already knew when she was getting close to enclosure 7, not because of anything she saw, because of what she heard, or rather what she didn't hear. The other dogs in the facility created a low ambient energy movement, breath, the occasional sound. But as they approached the east wing, that energy changed. The other dogs near enclosure 7 were quieter, pressed toward the backs of their enclosures. Their posture was different, not fearful exactly, but aware. The way animals are aware of something in their environment that commands a different kind of attention. Marsh stopped about 15 feet from the enclosure. I'd recommend we stay at this distance, he said. Avery kept walking. Lieutenant Collins. She stopped at the front of enclosure 7 and looked in. Titan was in the back corner. He was enormous for a Malinois, heavier than the breed standard, more muscle through the shoulders and chest. His coat was the rich fawn and black that the breed is known for, but there was something about his coloring that had always been slightly distinctive. A marking above his right eye, a small asymmetry that she had memorized years ago when she was looking at him every single day. He was lying down, his head was up, his eyes were on her, and for 4 seconds, neither of them moved. Marsh was saying something behind her, something about behavioral history, something about the removal timeline, something about safety protocols. She heard the words the way you hear background traffic registering their existence without processing their content, because Titan had just done something. He had lifted his head slightly, not in aggression, not in warning, in recognition. It was subtle. If you didn't know what you were looking for, you would have missed it entirely. The slight lifting of the chin, the change in the eyes from flat defensive watchfulness to something more complicated, something that looked in the particular vocabulary of a dog who had spent years learning to read one specific human, almost like disbelief. Avery pressed her right hand flat against the chain link, not forcing contact, not reaching in, just making herself available. Titan got to his feet. Marsh stopped talking. The enormous dog walked slowly across the enclosure toward the front. Every step was controlled. His body language was not aggressive. It was careful. The way you move when you're approaching something you want desperately to be true and are terrified to trust. He stopped 2 feet from the chain link. He looked at her hand. He looked at her face, and then he sat down. Behind her, Avery heard Marsh exhale sharply. What in the he doesn't? Titan doesn't approach the front of the enclosure. He's been in that back corner for 6 weeks. Avery wasn't listening. She was looking at Titan, and in the completely private language that existed between this dog and this woman, a language built over years of early mornings and long missions, and the kind of trust that only forms when two creatures have genuinely protected each other, she said one word under her breath, quiet enough that Marsh almost certainly didn't hear it. A name, not Titan, his real name. The name she had given him years ago before he was reclassified, before he was transferred, before everything that had been done to him began. The dog's ears shifted, his head tilted by exactly 3 degrees. And for the first time in 6 weeks, Titan made a sound, not a bark, not a growl. A sound that even Marsh, who had spent 30 years working in canine programs, seemed to have trouble categorizing. It was the sound a dog makes when it finds something it believed was gone forever. The incident spread through the SEAL team by afternoon. Avery had not said anything to anyone Marsh had. She would have guessed that. Marsh was the type of man who processed surprising information by sharing it widely and quickly, which served the dual purpose of spreading the story and establishing himself as the person who had been there when it happened. By 1400 hours, Cole Ramirez appeared at the door of the small office she had been assigned to review Titan's files. He didn't knock. He just stood in the doorway with his arms crossed and the expression of a man who had something that didn't fit into the framework he had been operating inside. Marsh says Titan walked to the front of his enclosure and sat down for you, Ramirez said. Avery looked up from the files. Marsh talks a lot. Is it true? Yes, Ramirez was quiet for a moment. He walked in and sat down in the chair across from her desk without being invited. She noted that, not as a negative, as a data point about who he was: direct, action-oriented, not particularly interested in formality when he wanted to understand something. How, he asked. That's what I'm trying to figure out, she said, which was not entirely a lie. She was trying to figure something out. She just already knew most of the answer. You've worked with Malinois before? He asked. Extensively. But you've never met Titan. She looked at him directly. What makes you say that? The question landed between them like something physical. Ramirez shifted slightly. Because if you had worked with Titan before, that would have been in his file. And his file has been reviewed by Walker, Marsh, and 3 other specialists over the past year. Nobody mentioned a prior handler relationship. Then you should ask yourself why that might be, she said. Ramirez stared at her. What are you not telling me? Quite a lot, Sergeant. But I'm not trying to be evasive. I'm trying to do this in the right order so that the story makes sense when you hear it. I don't like stories, he said. I like facts. Then here's a fact, she said. She pushed one of the documents across the desk toward him. Titan's behavioral records from 22 months ago show a completely functional K9 with a 94% operational rating. 18 months ago, those records stopped. There's a gap of 4 months in his history. And then he comes back into the system at this base with a completely different behavioral profile. That is a fact. Ramirez looked at the document, his jaw tightened. Marsh said it was a failed handler transition. 4 months is not a handler transition. 4 months is a program. Ramirez looked up at her. Something shifted in his face. The assessment was still there, but it was moving toward a different conclusion than where it had started. What kind of program? That's what I'm trying to find out, she said. And I'm going to need access to records that aren't in the standard K9 file. You're going to need Walker to sign off on that. I know. Ramirez sat back. He looked at the document for another moment, then at her. He's not going to like this. He doesn't like most things he didn't think of first, she said. But he's a good commander. He'll follow the evidence. Ramirez almost laughed. It was a real one this time, brief and genuine and slightly surprised. You figured Walker out in one meeting? I read people the way I read dogs, she said. Behavior tells you more than words. He stood up. He was quiet for a moment, and she could see him making a decision. Not a small one. I'll talk to Walker, he said. I'm not promising anything. I'm not asking for a promise, she said. I'm asking for a conversation. After he left, Avery sat alone in the office with the files spread across the desk in front of her. She had been doing this since she arrived on the base, keeping her breathing steady, keeping her expression controlled, managing the careful distance between what she was showing and what she was actually feeling. It was a skill she had developed over years. But sitting alone in a room with Titan's records open in front of her, that distance collapsed for just a moment. The gap in the records, 4 months. She had already known about the gap before she arrived here because she had already done more research than anyone at this base understood. She had been trying to get access to those records for 11 months. 11 months of requests going nowhere, of files marked restricted, of an official explanation that kept changing slightly every time she received it. 11 months of knowing that something had been done to a dog she had trained from a puppy. A dog who had saved her life more than once. A dog who had lost the only person he trusted and then been taken away before she could get back to him. She pressed her palms flat on the desk. She breathed. She looked at the document in front of her, the 4-month gap, the behavioral shift, the clinical language of someone describing an animal as a malfunctioning piece of equipment. She thought about the way Titan had sat down in front of her today. Careful, terrified, desperately wanting something to be true. She knew exactly how that felt. Nathan Walker called her into his office at 1700 hours. Ramirez had talked to him. That was faster than she had expected, which meant Ramirez had prioritized it, which told her something about him. Walker had the document she had given Ramirez on the desk in front of him. He also had 3 other documents that she had not seen, which meant he had done some pulling of records on his own between the afternoon and now. She noted that too. He looked at her when she walked in. The unreadable blue eyes were doing their work, processing, categorizing, deciding. She sat down before he told her to, which was a calculated choice. She wanted him to know she wasn't intimidated. She also wanted him to know she respected his process because she followed it by putting her hands folded on the table in clear view and waiting for him to start. Ramirez says you found a gap in Titan's records, Walker said. Yes, Master Chief, and you believe this gap indicates some kind of unauthorized or undocumented program. I believe it indicates a program that was documented separately from the standard canine records, which is why it doesn't appear in the file you were given. Walker looked at the documents on his desk. The canine program director provided this facility with Titan's complete history. Dr. Marsh provided the facility with the records he was authorized to share, Avery said. That may not be the same as the complete history. Something moved behind Walker's eyes. It was very quick and she almost missed it. But it was there. She had touched something that he had already wondered about. What exactly are you suggesting, Lieutenant? I'm not suggesting anything yet, Master Chief. I'm saying that the behavioral shift in Titan's records from a 94% operational animal to the dog, currently sitting in enclosure 7, cannot be explained by handler transition alone. And the 4-month gap in the timeline is where the explanation lives. Walker was quiet for a long moment. He had the stillness of someone who had trained himself not to react until he had processed, which was actually a trait she admired, even if it made him difficult to read. If there is a separate documentation trail, he said carefully, accessing it would require authorizations above this unit's standard clearance. I know that's not a process I can initiate without cause. Titan's behavioral deterioration is cause, she said. An animal that was operationally certified at 94% doesn't fall apart in a standard handler transition. That's the cause. Walker looked at her for a long time. Not hostile now. Something more complicated. Something that looked like a man who had been operating with one set of assumptions and was quietly confronting the possibility that those assumptions had a gap in them that he hadn't noticed. What do you know about this program, he asked. The phrasing was careful, precise. It was asking something specific without being specific. I know enough to want to know more, she said. That's not an answer. No, Master Chief, it isn't. She looked at him steadily. But I'd like to give you the complete one when I have it. Because incomplete answers in a situation like this do more damage than silence. Another long pause. Then Walker picked up one of the documents from his desk, the one she hadn't seen, and slid it toward her. She looked at it. Her expression did not change, but her heart rate did. It was a transfer document, old, 18 months old. It was the authorization that had moved Titan from a previous assignment into the behavioral program that had produced the 4-month gap. It was signed by 3 people. 2 of them she didn't recognize. The third was Gerald Marsh. I pulled that an hour ago, Walker said. It was in a different record system than the standard K9 database. It took some digging. He paused. I want to understand why the program director of this facility signed a transfer authorization for a dog that he later told me he had no prior history with. The room was very quiet. Avery looked at the signature on the document. She looked at Walker. So do I, she said. Are you going to be straight with me, he asked. At some point in this process, are you going to tell me what you actually know about this dog? She held his gaze. Yes, she said. When I have enough to show you the whole picture, I will tell you everything. I promise you that. He studied her. The blue eyes reading her the way she read dogs, looking for the thing that behavior reveals when words stay controlled. 18 days, he said. Titan's removal order executes in 18 days. If you're going to do something, it needs to happen in that window. I know, she said, and Collins. He waited until she met his eyes fully. If you get into this program and you find something I need to know about something that affects my unit, my team, the integrity of this command, I need you to bring that to me first, not to command above me, not to anyone else, to me. Yes, Master Chief, she said. It was the first moment in the entire conversation where she felt something shift, not softening exactly, more like the first frame of a picture coming into focus. That night, Avery sat outside Titan's enclosure after the facility staff had gone home. She was not supposed to be there after hours. She had not asked for permission because she already knew what the answer would be. She had simply stayed. She sat on the ground outside the chain link, her back against a support post, her legs crossed, the facility lights casting long shadows across the floor. Titan was in the back of the enclosure. She didn't say anything. She didn't try to call him to the front. She just sat there, in his space, letting him understand that she was not going to demand anything from him. Not going to push, not going to perform, not going to make herself the kind of human in presence that had been destroying his trust for the past 1.5 years. She just existed, 17 minutes passed. Then she heard the soft sound of paws on the concrete floor. Not fast, not aggressive, slow, deliberate. Each step placed with the careful weight of something fragile choosing to move towards something uncertain. She didn't look up. She kept her eyes on the floor in front of her. Another few seconds. And then, on the other side of the chain link, just a foot from where she sat, Titan lay down. Not sitting, not standing at alert, lying down, the posture of a dog choosing rest in the presence of someone it has decided to trust. The tears that she had been holding back for 11 months made it as far as the back of her throat before she stopped them. Not yet, she had work to do. "I'm here," she said, barely above a whisper. "I'm sorry it took so long. But I'm here now and I'm not going anywhere." The enormous dog exhaled, a long, slow breath, and Avery Collins sat in the dark outside a chain-link enclosure beside the dog that everyone had given up on and began to plan how to dismantle every lie that had been built around 18 days. She had been moving toward this for 11 months. She could do a great deal in 18 days. The next morning arrived the way mornings do at a military base, without ceremony, without warning, with the kind of absolute authority that doesn't ask permission. Avery had slept 4 hours. She had been back in her quarters by midnight, but sleep had not come easily, because every time she closed her eyes, she saw Titan lying down on the other side of that chain link, and the image carried so much weight that her chest could barely hold it. She was back at the K-9 facility by 5:15. The overnight staff member, a young petty officer named Garcia, who couldn't have been more than 22, looked up from his desk with the startled expression of someone who had not expected to see a lieutenant standing in the entrance before sunrise. He scrambled to his feet. "Lieutenant Collins, I didn't know you were scheduled for an early." "I'm not scheduled," she said. "I'm just here. Go back to what you were doing." Garcia sat down slowly, watching her with the cautious attention of someone trying to figure out the right response to a situation his training had not covered. She walked past him without explaining herself, because explanations were something she offered when they were necessary, and right now they weren't. Enclosure 7 was at the end of the East Wing. The lights in the facility were on their overnight setting, lower, steadier, the kind of light that exists to maintain function without demanding full alertness. The other dogs stirred as she passed. Some of them raised their heads. A few of them stood. She moved through the space the way she always moved through K-9 facilities, which was the way she had been taught by a woman named Chief Petty Officer Diane Holt 11 years ago in a training facility outside of San Diego, slowly, deliberately, letting the animals read her before she asked anything of them. Titan was already awake. He was standing at the front of his enclosure. She stopped when she saw that, not because it surprised her exactly, but because the sight of it, this enormous, complicated, damaged animal standing at the front of a space where he had retreated to the back corner for 6 weeks, hit her somewhere below the level of thought. She stood there for a moment and let it hit her. Then she walked forward and sat down on the floor in front of him, the same way she had the night before. He didn't retreat. He sat down too. They stayed like that for 40 minutes, and Avery said almost nothing, and it was the most productive 40 minutes she had spent since arriving on this base. At 6:15, she heard footsteps behind her. She recognized them before she turned around, because she had already spent enough time around Cole Ramirez to know the particular cadence of how he moved, purposeful, slightly impatient, the walk of someone who decided where he was going before he started moving. "You been here all morning?" he asked. "Since 5:15. He came to stand beside her. He looked at Titan. Titan looked at him with the flat, watchful stillness that he showed every person except Avery, and Ramirez took an instinctive half-step back. She noticed. He noticed that she noticed, and something in his jaw tightened briefly before he controlled it. "He won't come at you from this side of the chain link," she said, not to reassure him, just as a fact. "I know that intellectually," Ramirez said. "My body has a different opinion. Your body is responding to his body language correctly. He's not relaxed with you. That's a diplomatic way of putting it." He looked at her. "What are you doing out here this early?" "The same thing I was doing last night, letting him get used to my presence without demanding anything from it." Ramirez looked at the dog, then at her, with an expression that was working through something. "You know what's strange?" he said. "I've walked through this wing probably 40 times in the past 6 months. Every single time, Titan was in the back of that enclosure, pressed against the wall, not looking at anything." He paused. "He's been standing at the front since before I got here this morning." Garcia said he moved up there around 4 a.m. Avery said nothing. That's about 4 hours after you left last night, Ramirez said. Still nothing from her. Collins, his voice shifted. Not hard. More like a man who was tired of operating with incomplete information and had decided to say so directly. I talked Walker into giving you access to restricted records. I went to bat for you based on what you showed me yesterday. I need to understand what I'm working with here. Who are you to this dog? She looked at Titan. The dog was still watching her with that expression that she had spent years learning to read, the one that existed somewhere between relief and the careful guardedness of something that had been hurt badly enough to be afraid of its own relief. I trained him, she said. The silence that followed had texture to it. You trained him, Ramirez repeated, from 14 weeks old. 18 months of development training, then 2 years of operational deployment alongside my primary partner. She kept her eyes on Titan. His name, his real name, the one I gave him, is not in any file you have access to. Because when he was transferred out of my custody, that name was replaced with his operational designation. That's standard in some classified programs. You rename the asset to sever the documentation trail. Ramirez sat down on the floor beside her. Not because she invited it. Because his legs apparently made the decision before his brain caught up. You're telling me this dog, the dog that put Harris and Morrison in medical, is your dog? He's not my dog. He was never property. He was my partner. She turned to look at Ramirez directly. And someone took him away from me while I was at Walter Reed recovering from a gunshot wound, reassigned him into a program I was never informed about, and then spent 18 months wondering why he kept attacking people. She paused. I wasn't wondering. I knew exactly why. I just couldn't get anyone to listen. Ramirez put his elbows on his knees and stared at the floor between his feet. She watched him process it the way you can see someone's understanding of a situation physically shifting, old assumptions moving aside to make room for new ones that don't fit the same shape. 11 months, he said finally. You said last night you'd been trying to access his records for 11 months. Yes, and during those 11 months, Titan was here, in that enclosure, being evaluated and reevaluated and labeled uncontrollable, while the one person who actually understood was filing paperwork that kept getting denied. Yes, Ramirez looked at Titan. Titan looked back at him with the same flat watchfulness. But something had shifted slightly. The dog's ears were a fraction more relaxed than they had been 2 minutes ago. Not because of Ramirez, because of the quality of the conversation. Dogs don't parse words, but they read the emotional frequency of human exchange with an accuracy that most humans never achieve with each other. Who denied the paperwork? Ramirez asked. Avery reached into the folder she had brought with her and pulled out a single sheet. She held it out to him. He took it and read it, and she watched his expression travel from neutral attention to something harder. Every denial over 11 months carried the same authorizing signature. Gerald Marsh. Ramirez looked up from the paper. His voice was very controlled. He denied your access requests, every single one. Different reasons each time. Administrative hold, restricted classification, pending behavioral review, interbase protocol conflict. She took the paper back. 11 different reasons over 11 months. But the same signature. He knew, Ramirez said. Not a question. He knew, she confirmed. Another silence. This one was different from the ones before it. This one had heat in it. Why? Ramirez asked. What's the point of blocking you specifically, if the dog is just going to be removed anyway? Because if I had access to the full records, I would have found the 4-month gap, and I would have asked the same questions I'm asking now. And the answers to those questions are something that Dr. Gerald Marsh does not want asked in any official context. She stood up, which means those answers are the most important thing I can find in the next 17 days. Ramirez stood too. He looked at the dog one more time, and this time the look was different from every look he had given Titan before. Less wariness. Something closer to anger on the animal's behalf, which was a feeling Avery had been carrying for nearly a year and was glad to see landing somewhere besides her own chest. I'm going to talk to Walker again, Ramirez said. I know, she said. This time it's going to be a different kind of conversation. I know that too, she said. He left. She turned back to the enclosure. Titan was still sitting there watching her with those eyes that had always seen more than people expected a dog to see. She pressed her hand against the chain link again, and this time slowly, with the deliberateness of a choice being made at some deep level. He leaned his nose forward and touched it to her fingers. She kept her face completely still, but something inside her, something that had been locked and cold for 11 months, came fractionally apart. 17 days, she told him quietly. I just need 17 days. His warm breath moved across her knuckles. She was going to need every single one of them. Nathan Walker's meeting with Ramirez lasted 22 minutes. Avery knew this because Ramirez texted her when it started and texted her when it ended, which she had not expected from him, and which told her that he had fully committed to whatever this was becoming. The text at the end said 3 words: "He wants files." She texted back too, "Get them." Walker pulled the records by noon. Not the standard K9 database. The secondary system, the one he had dug into the night before, the one that had produced the transfer document with Marsh's signature. He went deeper this time, with the authorization of a master chief who had decided that incomplete information was no longer acceptable. What he found was not in the records he had been given when Titan arrived at this facility. What he found was in a partition of the system that was classified 2 levels above the standard K9 program documentation. He called Avery and Ramirez into his office at 13:30. He did not offer them seats this time. He stood behind his desk with the documents spread in front of him, and the expression on his face was something Avery had not seen there before. Not the controlled assessment of the first meeting, not the careful management of the second. This was the expression of a man who had found something he hadn't been looking for and was determining in real time what it meant. "Sit down," he said. This time the words meant something different. They were not dismissal. They were the opening of something. They sat. He looked at the documents for another moment, and then he looked at Avery. "How long have you known about Project Linchpin?" The name landed in the room like a stone dropped into still water. Ramirez looked at her sharply. Avery kept her eyes on Walker. "I knew a program existed. I didn't know its designation until approximately 40 seconds ago." Walker nodded slowly as if this confirmed something he had assessed. Project Linchpin was a behavioral conditioning research program initiated 23 months ago by a joint working group within the Naval K9 program. The stated objective was developing military working dogs capable of full operational effectiveness with any qualified handler, without dependency on a primary handler relationship. He paused. The theory was that handler dependency creates operational vulnerability. If your primary handler is lost in the field, a handler-dependent dog becomes non-operational. Linchpin was designed to solve that problem. By destroying the primary bond, Avery said. By reconditioning it out of the animal, yes. Walker's voice was flat, but beneath the flatness there was something working. 14 dogs were enrolled in the program. The conditioning involved a sequence of controlled stress events designed to break the primary attachment and replace it with a generalized compliance response. Ramirez had gone very still beside her. "Controlled stress events," he repeated. "That's the language in the file," Walker said. "What does it mean in practice?" Ramirez asked, and his voice was doing the thing it had done when he looked at the 11 denial signatures controlled, but with heat underneath. "It means they systematically frightened and disoriented the dogs while removing every stimulus associated with their primary handler. Sound, scent, object association. The protocol was designed to make the primary bond feel unsafe, so the animal would stop seeking it." Walker looked at the document as he said this, and something in his face shifted for just a moment. He had spent his career around working dogs. She could see that this information was landing in him the way it would land in anyone who understood what those animals were. Titan was the 3rd subject enrolled. He was also the first to what the program called resist reconditioning. "He refused to break," Avery said. "He became aggressive," Walker said, which the program interpreted as a failure of the protocol, which is why he was eventually removed and transferred here. What the program did not document, and what I believe they deliberately chose not to document, is that his aggression was specifically targeted. Every handler he attacked had used a command sequence that was part of the linchpin reconditioning protocol. He looked up from the papers. He wasn't attacking randomly. He was attacking the stimuli that had been used to hurt him. The room held that for a moment. Ramirez exhaled through his nose, and Harris and Morrison. Both had been briefed on Titan's partial history and had attempted to use modified versions of the reconditioning commands to establish control. The program recommended that approach for resistant subjects. Walker set the document down. They were essentially repeating the trauma and expecting a different result. "Who ran Linchpin?" Ramirez asked. Walker looked at him. Then at Avery. The program director for this installation was the base-level supervisor for all 14 subjects assigned here. He was responsible for documentation, assessment, and the removal recommendation for any subject deemed unresponsive to reconditioning. Neither Avery nor Ramirez said the name. They didn't need to. "Gerald Marsh," Walker said. The words sat in the room the way a verdict sits in a courtroom. Avery watched Walker's face carefully. She could see him moving through the implications in real time, the way a commander moves through tactical information, not emotionally but systematically, mapping consequences, identifying actions, prioritizing responses. He was not a man who made decisions with his feelings. He made them with his training and his judgment. And right now, both of those were pointed directly at a conclusion he had not been prepared for when he woke up this morning. The other 13 dogs, Avery said. Walker looked at her. Titan is not the only one. You said 14 dogs were enrolled. What happened to the other 13? Walker's silence was its own answer. Where are they, Master Chief? Spread across 7 different installations. He picked up another document. Most of them received the same removal recommendation as Titan. 4 have already been euthanized. 2 are in long-term holding with no active review scheduled. The remaining 7 are at various stages of the process Titan is currently in. The word euthanized hit the room like something physical. Ramirez leaned forward in his chair. 4 dogs are already dead because of this program. Yes, and Marsh is still running the K9 program at this installation. Walker looked at him. Until I have enough to take this above me formally, yes. Removing a program director requires a documented justification that goes through the chain above this unit. I cannot act on what I have in this room alone. What do you need? Avery asked. He looked at her, and for the first time since she had walked into this office on her first day, Nathan Walker looked at her not as a problem that had been assigned to him, not as a command decision he hadn't made, but as something else entirely. He looked at her the way he had said he looked at his own team as someone with a capability he needed. I need Titan operational, he said. I need him to demonstrate function under evaluation conditions with documentation on record. Because a dog that passes a formal operational evaluation cannot be removed on a behavioral grounds recommendation. It overrides the removal order. He paused. And I need documentation of the reconditioning protocol with enough specificity that the chain above me has no choice but to open a formal investigation into Linchpin. How long do I have? She asked. The evaluation that would override the removal order can be requested with 48 hours notice, which means you need Titan ready in 15 days. 15 days, she said. Can you do it? She thought about the dog lying down beside the chain link last night. The careful, fragile, deliberate choice of a creature that had been taught to believe that trust meant pain, deciding to try one more time because something in the person on the other side of the fence was familiar enough to risk it. She thought about 4 dogs already gone, 7 more somewhere in the system right now, waiting in back corners of enclosures that nobody was sitting outside of. Yes, she said, but I need something from you. Name it. Full access to the facility. No restrictions on my time with Titan. No requirement to have other handlers present. And Marsh stays away from enclosure 7 until this is done. Walker considered this for a moment. The last one is going to raise questions. Tell him you're implementing a new behavioral observation protocol and outside contact with the subject needs to be minimized. He can't argue with that without revealing that he has a specific interest in Titan's continued failure. Walker almost smiled. It was the briefest shift present for less than a second. You think like an operator, he said. I think like someone who's been fighting a bureaucratic system for 11 months, she said. It's similar. He nodded. You have what you need. Avery stood. Ramirez stood beside her. They were almost at the door when Walker spoke again. Collins. She turned. His face was back to its usual unreadable configuration, but something in the set of it was different. Something that would have been invisible to anyone who hadn't spent enough time studying the way his expressions worked to know what the variations meant. The dog that pulled those soldiers out of the vehicle, he said, in the incident record from 3 years ago. That was Titan? Yes, Master Chief. And your partner. The one who was with you during his original training. He paused. Were they in that vehicle? She held his gaze.
Yes.
The silence that followed had weight and dignity in it. Get him ready, Walker said. She walked out. The 15 days that followed were unlike anything Avery had experienced in 7 years of K9 work, and she had experienced things that would have broken most people in half. She had learned early on that working with military dogs was never really about the dog. It was about understanding the relationship between a creature's experience and its behavior, and then finding the thread that connected the two and following it back to the place where things went wrong. With Titan, the thread was almost impossibly fine. The first 3 days were about presence. She sat. He sat. She talked to him in a low, continuous voice, not commands, not training language, just words. She told him things she hadn't told anyone. She talked about the 11 months. She talked about the requests that kept getting denied, the phone calls that went nowhere, the night she sat in a parking lot outside a government building in Virginia and cried for the first time since she'd left Walter Reed. She talked about his original training, the specific sequences they had developed together, the private vocabulary of signals and responses that had been theirs and nobody else's. Whether he understood the words was not the point. He understood the voice. He understood the emotional content that moved through the voice like current through wire. And what he heard over 3 days of steady talking was that the frequency he had been waiting for was back, the one that meant safety, the one that meant partnership, the one that meant the world had a reliable shape again. On the 4th day, she stood up. She looked at him through the chain link and she said, in the voice she had used years ago in a dusty training facility when he was 14 weeks old and learning what language meant, "Ready?" His ears came forward. She opened the enclosure. Garcia, watching from the far end of the facility, later said he had grabbed the emergency contact panel and had his hand on it for approximately 30 seconds, ready to hit the alert. He said the dog came out of the enclosure like water, not fast, not slow, with a fluid continuity of motion that didn't fit his understanding of how Titan moved. He said the dog went straight to Lieutenant Collins and sat in front of her with his shoulder against her leg and just stayed there. Garcia said he stood with his hand on the emergency panel for about 20 more seconds before he realized he wasn't going to need it. Then he sat down at his own desk and took several slow, deep breaths. Avery put her hand on Titan's head. He leaned into it. She gave him 1 minute of just being two living things that had found each other again after a long and terrible separation. Then she straightened up and her voice shifted, and she said the first command she had ever taught him, the one that had been the beginning of their entire language together. He responded without hesitation. She moved through the next hour systematically and carefully, not pushing, reading every signal, letting him tell her what was solid and what still needed rebuilding. Some things were intact, the foundational commands, the basic signals, the deep body knowledge of what her movements meant. Those things lived in a part of him that the linchpin protocol hadn't been able to reach, because they had been built before he was old enough to be afraid. Other things were fractured: the response to unfamiliar commands, the tolerance for proximity with anyone else present, the sound sensitivity that the reconditioning protocol had created by pairing certain sounds with stress events. Those things would take time. She made a list. She worked the list. On day 6, Ramirez appeared at the facility entrance and asked if he could observe. She told him he could, but he needed to stay at the far end of the wing and not make eye contact with Titan. He agreed without argument, which surprised her, until she realized it shouldn't have, because Ramirez had made a decision somewhere in the previous 6 days about what this situation required from him, and part of that decision was doing things the way she told him to. He watched for 2 hours without saying a word. At the end of the session, when she had Titan back in the enclosure and was writing notes, Ramirez walked over. He looked at the dog, who looked back at him with the same flat watchfulness, and then he said, "He's different." Yes. How much of it is real and how much of it is because you're here? It was a good question. It was the kind of question that told her Ramirez had been thinking seriously about what he was watching, rather than just observing it. "Right now, most of it is because I'm here," she said. "That's what we're working on. Building the foundation back out so that he can extend trust to others without it threatening his core stability. Can that be done in 9 more days? Enough of it. Enough to pass an evaluation." She looked at him. "The evaluation isn't about perfection. It's about demonstrating that the behavioral diagnosis he was given is wrong. That's a different standard." Ramirez nodded. He was quiet for a moment. Marsh asked Walker yesterday why the enclosure's 7 observation protocol was excluding him specifically. She looked up from her notes. "What did Walker say?" "Exactly what you told him to say. New behavioral protocol. Minimize outside contact." A pause. Marsh pushed back. "Said as program director, he should have oversight access." And Walker told him the protocol was being implemented on the recommendation of the assigned specialist, and that his objections could be submitted in writing to the unit command. Something moved through her. Not quite satisfaction. Something more complicated. "Marsh knows something is happening." "Yeah," Ramirez said. "He knows. The question is what he does about it." She looked at Titan. The dog was watching her with the particular attention he gave her when he knew a conversation was important, when the frequency of human exchange in his vicinity told him that something significant was being decided. He's going to try to accelerate the removal order, she said. That's what I think too. How fast can he move it? Walker thinks he can hold it at the current timeline. But if Marsh goes above Walker to the base commander, he won't, she said. Going above Walker means explaining why. And explaining why means answering questions about linchpin that he doesn't want asked. She paused. He's going to try something lateral. Something that looks like standard procedure. Like what? She thought about it. She thought about a man who had spent 11 months finding new administrative reasons to deny the same request. A man who was methodical, bureaucratically sophisticated, and accustomed to operating in the space between official procedure and actual intent. A behavioral incident, she said. Something that goes on record. Something that gives him documented grounds to push the removal forward without it looking like a personal decision. Ramirez was very still. He'd need Titan to actually do something, or he'd need someone to report that he did. The implications settled over them both. I'm putting Garcia on a double shift, Ramirez said. Eyes on the facility 24 hours. Don't tell Garcia why. Count, he stood up. How do you do this? You're sitting here planning 2 steps ahead of a man who's been in this system for 30 years. You're rebuilding a traumatized animal on a 15-day timeline. You spent 11 months fighting this alone. How do you keep the whole thing in your head without it falling apart? She looked at him. It was the most personal question he had asked her, and she suspected it had cost him something to ask it, because Ramirez was not a man who asked personal questions easily. I stopped thinking about the whole thing, she said. I just worked the next step, then the one after that. If I look at all of it at once, it's too heavy. She glanced at Titan, who was still watching her. He taught me that, actually. Dogs don't carry the whole picture. They just respond to what's in front of them. It's a better system than the one most people use. Ramirez looked at the dog. Something in his face changed. Not dramatically, but it was there, the slow movement of a man whose understanding of something has quietly and permanently shifted. He left without saying anything else. She went back to her notes. 9 days she was going to be ready. On day 9, Marsh made his move. It wasn't the incident report she had anticipated. It was subtler than that, and when Ramirez came to find her at 7 a.m. with the look on his face that meant the situation had changed, she felt the cold, clean clarity of recognizing an opponent who was more sophisticated than the average problem. Marsh had submitted a formal medical welfare assessment request for Titan, citing concern for the animal's physical condition after 6 weeks of behavioral isolation. The request, submitted through the base veterinary office rather than the K9 program structure, called for a full evaluation by the base vet, who reported to Marsh within 72 hours. The evaluation would include a behavioral component. A negative behavioral assessment from the base vet would create independent documentation supporting the removal order, independent of Walker's unit command. It was clean. It was professional. It was exactly the kind of move that someone who had spent 30 years navigating military bureaucracy would know to make. Ramirez dropped the paperwork on the workbench beside her. 72 hours, he said. She read through it. She read it again. She set it down. He's going to bring in his own vet, she said. Someone who knows what result is expected. That's what Walker thinks too. Walker is already working the chain to challenge the jurisdiction. The welfare assessment should go through the Unit K9 specialist, which is you, not directly to the base vet. But that challenge is going to take time. How much time? Best case, 48 hours to get a ruling, which means the 72-hour window and the jurisdictional challenge land at almost the same time. Yeah, she stood very still for a moment. Titan was at the front of his enclosure watching her. He had been watching her more carefully this morning than usual, which meant he was reading something in her body language. She consciously steadied herself, releasing the tension from her shoulders. He relaxed slightly. She looked at Ramirez. Then I need to move the timeline. The evaluation, I need Titan for a full operational evaluation in 5 days, not 9. And I need Walker to request it before Marsh's welfare assessment can be conducted. Ramirez stared at her. You said 15 days minimum. I said 15 days to be thorough, 5 days to be ready enough. She looked at Titan. There's a difference. Collins, if he fails an evaluation. He won't. You can't know that. She turned to look at Ramirez directly. Her voice was level and clear and carried the absolute grounded certainty of someone who was not expressing hope. I trained this dog. I know what is intact in him, and I know what is damaged, and I know the difference between what he needs to perform under evaluation conditions and what he needs to be fully restored. He can do this in 5 days. It will not be his best work. It will be enough. Ramirez held her gaze for a long moment. He was looking for the things she was looking for. In every human, she dealt with the distinction between confidence and reality, the line between what someone believed and what was true. He found what he was looking for. I'll call Walker, he said. She turned back to Titan. Change of plans, she said quietly. The dog's ears came forward. She opened the enclosure door. They had 5 days. Walker submitted the formal evaluation request at 0600 on a Tuesday morning, and by 0615, Avery already knew that Marsh had been notified. Because Garcia, who had been running double shifts without knowing exactly why, texted Ramirez a single word. Movement Marsh had arrived at the K9 facility entrance at 0612, 3 minutes after Walker's request hit the system, which meant he had someone watching the command inbox, which meant he had been expecting this move and had prepared for it, which meant the next 72 hours were going to be the most dangerous of the entire process. Ramirez found Avery at the facility at 0630. She was already working with Titan in the outer training corridor, a long enclosed space adjacent to the enclosure wing that the facility used for indoor obedience work. Titan was moving through a sequence she had built specifically for the past 4 days, a layered set of commands that started with the foundational language they shared and extended outward toward the standardized military evaluation protocol. She had been bridging his personal vocabulary into the official assessment language, the way you build a translation dictionary, one word at a time, carefully, without confusion. Ramirez stood at the corridor entrance and watched for 30 seconds before he said anything. She appreciated that about him. He had learned in the past 9 days that observation came before speech, and that was a discipline most people never acquired. Marsh showed up at 0612. He said, I know. Garcia texted you and you texted me. My phone vibrated during the sit-stay sequence. She didn't look at him. She was watching Titan complete a directional search pattern, tracking the path of a training target she had placed at the far end of the corridor. What did he do? Tried to access the facility. Garcia told him the observation protocol was still active. Marsh told Garcia the protocol had been superseded by the welfare assessment request. Garcia told him he would need written confirmation from Lieutenant Collins or Master Chief Walker before he could grant access. A pause. Garcia held the line. Good. Titan reached the target. She gave him the release signal and he came back to her side with the smooth, ground-eating lope that was his natural gait. The one she had watched him develop from a puppy's uncertain scramble into an athlete's controlled efficiency. She put her hand on his shoulder briefly. What did Marsh do when Garcia refused? Left. But he made a call from the parking area. Ramirez watched him from the security camera. 12-minute call. To who? We don't know yet. Walker is working on it. She finally looked at Ramirez. He was carrying the expression he got when information was incomplete, and he didn't like operating with incomplete information, which was a reasonable expression for the situation they were in. He's calling the base commander, she said. He's going to argue that Walker's evaluation request is being used to obstruct a legitimate welfare assessment and that the base commander needs to intervene. Ramirez absorbed this. If the base commander comes down on Marsh's side, Walker loses the jurisdiction argument and Marsh gets his vet in here before the evaluation happens. She turned back to Titan. How long before Walker knows which way the base commander rules? He thinks by noon. She looked at her watch. 0641. She had approximately 5 hours and 20 minutes before the situation either stabilized or collapsed. She looked at Titan. He was watching her face with the complete attention of an animal that had learned to read human expression as a survival skill, and what he was reading right now was making his ears shift slightly forward, the signal that told her he knew something important was happening and he was ready. Then we use every minute of those 5 hours, she said. Get me Ramirez's 3 quietest operators, the ones with the most K9 experience. We're accelerating the unfamiliar handler component today. Ramirez went still. Today. You said that component was scheduled for day 5. Day 5 was the original timeline. This is the adjusted one. She met his eyes. I need him to demonstrate basic command compliance with at least 2 unfamiliar handlers before the evaluation. If the evaluation only shows responsiveness to me, Marsh will argue the assessment is handler-specific and doesn't demonstrate general operational function. He'll comply with unfamiliar handlers in 5 hours. She heard the doubt in his voice, and she didn't dismiss it because it was legitimate. Not fully, not perfectly, but enough to put on record that the pattern of violence toward handlers is not a fixed behavioral trait. That's the argument. I don't need perfection. I need evidence that contradicts the removal recommendation. Ramirez looked at Titan for a long moment. The dog looked back at him with the flat watchfulness that he maintained toward everyone who wasn't Avery. But there was something fractionally different about it now. Less wall, more window. It was subtle enough that most people would have missed it, but Ramirez had been watching this dog for 9 days and he caught it. Torres, Kim, and Vasquez, he said. They're the three with the most working dog background. I'll get them down here by 0730. Tell them nothing about the linchpin program. Tell them we're running an accelerated socialization protocol for the evaluation and that they'll be following my instructions exactly. No improvisation, no independent commands, no attempts to establish dominance. Got it. He was already moving. Then he stopped. Collins, she looked at him. If this goes wrong today, if Titan reacts badly with one of my guys, Marsh gets exactly the incident report he needs. I know, are you sure about this? She looked at Titan. The dog had sat down beside her while she was talking to Ramirez, pressing his shoulder against her leg with the quiet, solid weight of an animal that had decided where it belonged. She thought about the 14 weeks she had spent teaching him what safety felt like. She thought about the 4 dogs that were already gone. She thought about the 7 more sitting in back corners somewhere, waiting for someone who was never coming. I'm sure, she said. He left. She looked down at Titan. We're going to have company today, she told him, and you're going to show them who you actually are, not who they decided you were. She paused. Can you do that for me? His tail moved once. She took that as a yes. Torres arrived first at 0722, and Avery assessed him in approximately 45 seconds. He was 31, compact, with the efficient movements of someone who didn't waste energy on anything that wasn't purposeful. He had 5 years of working dog handling background from a previous assignment, and it showed in the way he approached the corridor entrance. He stopped at a respectful distance, kept his body language open, and did not make direct eye contact with Titan immediately. He had done this before. He knew the basics.
Sergeant Torres,
Thank you for coming. Ramirez said it was important. He looked at Titan with an expression that was professionally composed, but not entirely without the underlying wariness that every operator on this base carried when Titan was in the equation. This is the dog. This is Titan. She kept her voice neutral and even, what I need from you today is very specific. You're not going to try to command him. You're not going to try to establish rapport. You're going to stand in a designated position, follow the movements I direct you to make, and respond to my cues. Nothing independent, nothing off script. Can you do that? Yes, ma'am. Kim and Vasquez arrived within 2 minutes of each other, and she gave them the same briefing. They were both solid, disciplined, experienced, free of the kind of ego that made some operators unable to take direction from someone they outranked. She had Ramirez to thank for the selection. He had picked well. For the first 40 minutes, she didn't involve them with Titan directly at all. She ran Titan through his sequences while the 3 operators stood at the far end of the corridor and simply existed in his space. She was letting him build a reading on them, letting him understand through their stillness and their compliance with her direction that these were not threats, were not going to use the sounds and commands that had been used to hurt him, were not going to reach for him aggressively or demand submission through intimidation. Titan worked. He moved through the sequences with the focused efficiency that had been returning incrementally over the past 9 days, each session adding another layer of restoration to the operational capability that linchpin had fractured, but had not because he had refused to let it destroyed. At 0820, she called Torres forward. Titan's ears shifted. His body stilled for a moment in the particular way that meant he was making an assessment. She kept her own body language completely relaxed because he was reading her constantly, and she was his primary reference point for how to interpret everything else in his environment. If she was calm, that information was available to him. If she tensed, he would feel it before she expressed it. Torres stopped at the distance she indicated, 6 feet from Titan. Hold your right hand out, palm up, she said. Don't reach toward him. Just offer. Torres did it. Titan looked at the hand. He looked at Avery. He looked at the hand again. 15 seconds passed. 20. Torres held perfectly still. Whatever he was feeling internally, and she could see from the set of his jaw that something was working there, he managed it completely. Good operator discipline, she made a note. At 23 seconds, Titan took 1 step forward. At the far end of the corridor, she heard Kim exhale almost silently. Titan stopped with his nose 8 inches from Torres's hand. He didn't touch it. He read it, the scent, the temperature, the particular chemical information that told him things about this human that Torres himself probably didn't know. He held there for a long moment. Then he took the final step. His nose touched Torres's palm. Torres didn't move, didn't speak. He did exactly what she had told him to do, which was nothing. And that nothing was the most important thing he could have contributed to this moment. Avery released a breath she had been holding for approximately 40 seconds. Good, she said quietly, to both of them. By 0930, all three operators had achieved first contact. Not commands, not compliance sequences. Just contact, the foundational acknowledgement between an animal and a human that the presence is tolerable, that the space is shared, that the threat assessment has returned a result other than danger. It was a beginning. For a dog that had sent two people to medical for standing too close, it was a beginning that meant everything. At 10:04, Ramirez's phone went off. She knew from the way he looked at the screen that the base commander had ruled. She watched his face travel through the information before he looked up at her, and what she saw there was not the expression she had been hoping for. He ruled in Marsh's favor, Ramirez said. The welfare assessment proceeds. The jurisdictional challenge was denied on the grounds that the welfare assessment falls under base veterinary authority, which supersedes unit command in animal welfare matters. He paused. Marsh's vet access goes into effect at 1400. 10:04 to 1400, 3 hours and 56 minutes. Walker, she asked, is appealing to Naval Special Warfare Command. But that takes time. He looked at her. Marsh will have his vet in the facility in under 4 hours, Collins. She was quiet for a moment. The three operators at the far end of the corridor were watching her. Titan was watching her. Every person and animal in the space was calibrated to her response, waiting for her to tell them what shape the situation had. She did not let herself feel the weight of it, not now. She would feel it later, when there was room for it. Then I need Walker to formally request the operational evaluation right now, she said. Not tomorrow, not this afternoon now. If the evaluation request goes in before 1400, it creates an active operational assessment on record that conflicts with the welfare assessment. That's a documentation conflict that has to be resolved by Naval Special Warfare Command, not by the base commander. Ramirez was already dialing. She turned back to Torres, Kim, and Vasquez. We're moving to the next phase, she said. I need each of you to issue one basic command to Titan from a standing position. I'll tell you which command. You'll say it once clearly in a neutral tone. If he doesn't respond, you say nothing else. Clear? Torres looked at his two teammates, then at her. Clear. Walker's evaluation request went in at 10:17. By 10:23, the documentation conflict had been formally flagged in the base administrative system, which meant neither the welfare assessment nor the evaluation could proceed until Naval Special Warfare Command ruled on the precedence question. Marsh's 1400 window was frozen. Walker had bought them time. Not much in SWCOM would rule within 48 hours, but 24 hours was what she needed, because the evaluation was scheduled for 0900 the following morning, and if Walker could hold the freeze until then, Titan's formal operational assessment would be on record before Marsh could put anything in that record that contradicted it. It was the tightest operational margin she had ever worked in. She used every second of the remaining afternoon. Torres issued his first command at 10:31. Titan hesitated, a full 4-second pause that felt, to everyone watching, like it lasted considerably longer, and then complied. The compliance was not enthusiastic, it was careful. But it was compliance clean and unambiguous, from a dog who had been labeled permanently unresponsive to unfamiliar handler commands. Kim went at 11:15, Vasquez at 12:40. By 1300 hours, Avery had 3 operators who had each successfully issued and received compliance for a basic command sequence, and she had Garcia document every interaction in writing with timestamps, because documentation was the language of the system they were fighting inside, and she intended to be fluent in it. At 13:52, 8 minutes before Marsh's frozen access window, Ramirez came back to the corridor. NSWCOM acknowledged the conflict, he said. They're not ruling until 0800 tomorrow. She did the math, evaluation at 0900. NWCOM ruling at 0800. 1 hour between the ruling and the evaluation. If NSWCOM gave precedence to the welfare assessment, Marsh's vet could potentially conduct the behavioral component before Walker's evaluation began. 1 hour. Can Walker push the evaluation time to 0730, she asked. Ramirez looked at her. He can try, he made the call. Walker pushed it. The evaluation was moved to 0730, which meant they now had 30 minutes of buffer between SWCOM's ruling and the assessment that would determine whether Titan lived or died. 30 minutes. She spent the evening with Titan running the evaluation protocol she had built over the previous 9 days, tightening the sequences, identifying the 3 commands that still showed hesitation, and working through them repetition by repetitions until the hesitation compressed from 4 seconds to 2 to 1 to something that looked, in the dim facility lighting, like normal operational response. At 2200 hours, she sat down on the floor outside his enclosure and said, "Tomorrow." He was lying on his side, which was new. He hadn't lain on his side in front of her since the first week of his original training, when he was still young enough to sleep without guardedness. That he could do it now, in this facility, with everything that had happened in between, told her something about how much ground they had covered in 9 days. It also told her how much trust cost, how much it weighed, how much it meant when something broke and chose to try again. "You're ready," she said. "I know you are. I just need you to show them what you already are." His tail moved once on the concrete floor. She sat with him until midnight. 0700. The evaluation team arrived. 3 SEAL operators serving as assessors, an official military working dog evaluator from Naval Station San Diego named Chief Petty Officer Donnelly, and Nathan Walker, who stood at the edge of the assessment area with his arms crossed, and the expression of a man who had put his command reputation behind something and was prepared to stand there regardless of what happened next. Marsh was not present. His access freeze was still active. But Avery knew he was somewhere on the base, waiting for the NSW-COM ruling, which was due in 30 minutes. And the knowledge of that clock running in the background was something she could not allow into the space where she was working. She pushed it out. She focused on what was in front of her. Donnelly was 53, career military, with the weather directness of someone who had conducted enough evaluations to have no patience for performance, and an excellent eye for the difference between a trained animal and a compliant one. He shook Avery's hand and looked at Titan without the wariness that most people on this base showed, which she appreciated. He was professional. He would assess what was in front of him. "The subject's record shows a behavioral removal recommendation," Donnelly said. "I've reviewed the documentation. I need to understand what's changed in the past." He checked his notes. 9 days. "The behavioral profile in the record reflects a response to a specific conditioning protocol, not a fixed trait," Avery said. "The assessment I'm asking you to conduct will demonstrate the difference." Donnelly looked at her steadily. "That's a significant claim, Lieutenant." "Yes, Chief, it is." He looked at Titan. Titan looked at him. "Let's begin." The evaluation had 6 components: search and detection, obedience under distraction, unfamiliar handler compliance, environmental pressure response, controlled aggression, and the command that had never been part of a standard military evaluation, but that Walker had specifically requested be included because Walker had read the linchpin documents thoroughly enough to know that the command which the program had claimed Titan was permanently unable to obey was the most important thing to put on record. The stop command issued mid-aggression sequence. They moved through the first 4 components with the systematic efficiency that Donnelly's experience produced. Titan performed. Not flawlessly. There were 2 moments in the distraction component where the sound sensitivity from the linchpin protocol created a brief hesitation, and Donnelly noted them without comment in his evaluation log. But the performance was clean, purposeful, and unambiguous. A dog that had been labeled permanently non-operational was moving through a standard military evaluation with the precision of an animal that had never stopped being capable. Because he hadn't. He had simply stopped being trusted. At 0751, Ramirez's phone vibrated. He looked at it across the assessment area. His face went carefully neutral, in the way faces go when they're managing news that could go either direction. He caught Avery's eye and held up one finger. NSW-COM had ruled. She didn't know which way. She kept her face completely still and returned her attention to the evaluation. She couldn't know yet. She had to finish this first. Unfamiliar handler compliance was next. Torres stepped into the assessment area. Donnelly watched with the focused attention of someone who had read the incident reports involving Harris and Morrison and understood what he was about to see either confirm or contradict. Torres issued 3 commands in the sequence Avery had built with him over the past day. Titan complied with each one. The last compliance took 2 seconds longer than ideal, and Donnelly noted that too. But he complied, clean. 0803, 27 minutes since NSW-COM's ruling had come in. Ramirez still had not told her which way it went. Environmental pressure, was the component she had been least certain about because the pressure stimuli, loud, unexpected sounds, sudden movement, disorienting light changes overlapped directly with the linchpin conditioning. She had worked the sound sensitivity specifically, but there was a range of stimuli she couldn't fully predict. She watched Titan move through it and felt the thing she never allowed herself to feel during an assessment, which was fear trying to find a way into her chest, and she managed it the same way. She managed everything that tried to destabilize her by breathing, by focusing on what was directly in front of her, by trusting the work she had done. Titan held. He flinched at the second sound stimulus. It was visible. Donnelly noted it, but held his position and his command compliance, and he did not react with aggression. He processed the stimulus, identified it as non-threatening in the context of the current environment, and returned to operational readiness within 3 seconds. Donnelly looked up from his log and met Avery's eyes for the first time since the evaluation began. She read something in his face that she hadn't been sure she would see there. He was seeing what she saw, not a broken dog, a damaged one. There was a difference. And Donnelly, with 30 years of working dog evaluation behind him, knew exactly what that difference meant. Controlled aggression was the fifth component, and it was the one that Walker had spent the past 2 days thinking about more than any other. It was the component where Titan's history was most directly relevant, where the record of his attacks on handlers was most alive in the room, and it was the component that Avery had built the most careful preparation around, because the risk was real. Controlled aggression required Titan to engage a simulated target with full commitment and then, on command, stop. The handler who played the simulated target was Vasquez. He was suited in full protective gear, which was standard. He entered the assessment area at the far end from Titan. Donnelly gave the command to begin. Avery looked at Titan. Titan looked at her. She gave him the signal. He moved, not ran. It was more efficient than running. It was the controlled, powerful, purpose-built motion of a military working dog fully engaged in the task his entire body and training were designed for. And watching it, even Donnelly went very still. Titan covered the distance in less than 4 seconds. He engaged Vasquez at the exact point of contact that was proper training protocol controlled, precise, right on the target, and held. The room was absolutely quiet except for Vasquez's protected grunt of impact and the sound of Titan's breath. 1 second, 2. Avery gave the command stop. Titan released. He turned and walked back to her. He sat down at her left side. Donnelly had stopped writing. Walker uncrossed his arms. Torres, standing at the side of the assessment area, said something under his breath that Avery didn't hear, but from the expression on Kim's face standing next to him, it was something that conveyed a very specific kind of awe. Donnelly looked at his evaluation log. He looked at Titan. He looked at Avery. And then he did something that Avery had not seen a military working dog evaluator do in 7 years of working in the program. He set his pen down completely. "Lieutenant Collins," he said, "I have 31 years in military working dog evaluation. I have reviewed over 200 animals in this program. I want to be direct with you." He paused. "What I just assessed is not a dog with a behavioral removal recommendation. What I just assessed is a dog who was deliberately misclassified." Another pause. "And I intend to say so in my report." Walker crossed the assessment area. He stood in front of Donnelly, and the two men looked at each other with the kind of mutual recognition that exists between people who have both spent decades in service and understand, without needing to articulate it, the weight of what they're about to commit to on paper. "Chief Donnelly," Walker said, "Master Chief, thank you for your assessment. It's what I'm here for." Donnelly picked up his pen again. "You'll have my report by noon." Walker turned to look at Avery. She was standing beside Titan, her hand on the back of his neck, and the expression on her face was not triumph, because triumph was not what this moment felt like. What this moment felt like was more complicated and more earned than triumph. It felt like 11 months and 4 dead dogs and one that hadn't been, and a question finally answered on the record in official documentation by someone who could not be dismissed. Ramirez came across the assessment area. He stopped in front of her. He held up his phone so she could see the notification. NSWCOM had ruled in Walker's favor. Welfare assessment jurisdiction transferred to unit command. Marcia's access was denied. She read it twice. Then she looked at Ramirez, and he looked at her, and neither of them said anything for a moment because the moment had enough in it already. Then Ramirez did something she had not seen him do in 9 days. Crouched down in front of Titan, he held out his hand, palm up, the way she had shown Torres to do. He didn't say anything. He just held it there. Titan looked at the hand. He looked at Avery. She said nothing. He looked at Ramirez. And then he pressed his nose to Ramirez's palm and held it there for 3 full seconds before pulling back. Ramirez stood up. His jaw was working. He was managing something, the way operators manage things that catch them off guard by keeping the face as still as possible while the internal machinery processes at full speed. He's something else, he said finally. Yes, she said. He is, Walker rejoined them. He looked at the 3 of them standing there, the operator, the specialist, the dog, and he said, the evaluation result goes to command by noon. The removal order has stayed pending the chief's report. He paused. It's not over. Marsh is going to challenge this. I know, Avery said. The challenge goes to Naval Special Warfare Command. They'll look at the evaluation, the welfare assessment denial, the documentation conflict, the linchpin records. He met her eyes. And when they look at the linchpin records, they're going to look at every installation involved, every dog, every handler. She understood what he was saying. This was no longer a fight about one dog in one facility. It had become something larger than that the moment Walker pulled the secondary records. It had become something that was going to move through the chain of command with the weight of a formal investigation, and formal investigations in the military moved slowly and left marks. The other 7 dogs, she said, the ones still in holding. I've already requested their records, Walker said. All 7 facilities, she exhaled. Something in her chest that had been compressed for 11 months moved, not released, but moved, in the direction of release. Marsh, Ramirez said. The word had an edge to it. What happens to Marsh? Walker looked at him with the careful expression of a commander who understood that this question had an emotional answer and a procedural one, and that only one of them was appropriate right now. That's above my authority to determine. What I can tell you is that the documentation I've submitted as part of the evaluation request includes the full linchpin file, the transfer authorization with his signature, and the 11 access denial records. He paused. I can also tell you that a program director who signs removal orders for dogs he deliberately placed in a program designed to destroy them while simultaneously blocking the one person who could help them, that individual does not have a long career remaining. Ramirez looked at Titan. Something moved across his face that Avery recognized because she had been carrying the same thing for 11 months, a slow, sustained fury at what had been done to an animal that hadn't chosen any of it, that had simply served and trusted and been used and discarded and labeled dangerous for the crime of refusing to forget who he was. It's not enough, Ramirez said quietly. No, Walker said, but it's where we start. Garcia appeared at the entrance to the assessment area. He looked at the group, at Titan, at the scene in front of him that he clearly didn't have full context for but could feel the weight of. Everything okay, he asked. Avery looked at Titan. The dog was leaning against her leg with the easy, total confidence of an animal that had come home. His eyes were half closed. His breathing was slow. 112 pounds of military working dog, decorated beyond what most operators ever achieved, resting. Yes, Garcia, she said. Everything's okay. And for the first time in 11 months, she meant it completely. Donnelly's report landed at 11:47, 13 minutes before noon, and it hit the Naval Special Warfare Command inbox with the quiet, irreversible authority of official documentation that cannot be walked back once it exists. Avery was in her office when Ramirez forwarded her the confirmation. She read the subject line twice. Formal operational assessment K9 subject Titan result, fully operational. Removal recommendation overturned. She set her phone face down on the desk and sat with that for exactly 60 seconds before she picked it up again and kept moving, because 60 seconds was what she allowed herself, and the work was not done. Walker called a meeting at 1300. Not the small group that had been running this operation from the inside. A full meeting, his entire unit, every operator assigned to SEAL Team 7's support element. Avery walked in and felt the quality of the attention in the room before she reached her seat. These were men who had been watching the edges of this situation for 2 weeks without being told the full shape of it, and the evaluation result had reached them the way everything reaches a tight military unit, fast, incomplete, and charged with implication. She sat down. Walker stood at the front of the room. By now, most of you know that Titan passed his operational evaluation this morning, Walker said. He said it the way he said most things, without preamble, without decoration. What most of you don't know is the full context of why that evaluation was necessary and what it revealed. He paused. I'm going to give you that context now because this unit operates on complete information, and what I'm about to tell you affects every one of you. He laid it out, the linchpin program, the 14 dogs, the 4-month gap, the deliberate behavioral destruction of animals that had served beside American soldiers, the 11 months of denied access requests, Marsh's signature on every document that mattered. He spoke for 9 minutes without interruption, and the quality of the silence in the room changed as he talked. It started as the attentive quiet of a briefing and became something denser, something that had weight and temperature. When he finished, nobody spoke for several seconds. Then Torres said from the middle of the room, "4 dogs are already dead." "Yes," Walker said, "because of a program that Marsh ran." "Yes." Torres looked at the table. His jaw worked. He said nothing else, but the silence he produced was not empty. It was full of something that every person in the room recognized, because every person in the room had spent years in an environment where the bond between a handler and a working dog was understood as something real and functional and worth protecting. Cole Ramirez spoke from his seat at the left side of the table. "What happens to Marsh?" "Naval Special Warfare Command has been notified. The linchpin documentation has been submitted formally. Marsh has been placed on administrative hold, pending investigation, effective as of 1100 this morning." Walker looked at the room. "He is no longer functioning as Base K9 program director." Another silence. This one had a different quality. Something that was not quite satisfaction, because satisfaction was too clean for a situation where 4 animals were already gone, and the damage extended across 7 installations and an unknown number of lives. But something adjacent to it, the particular emotional state that arrives when a wrong thing is named correctly and the naming has consequences. Avery was watching the room the way she watched, everything reading the behavioral signals, the micro-expressions, the way men who were trained to manage their responses still couldn't entirely manage the ones that came from somewhere below the level of training. What she saw in the room was something she hadn't fully anticipated. She had expected professional acknowledgement. What she saw was something closer to grief. And underneath the grief, something she recognized from her own 11 months. Anger, the clean, purposeful kind that doesn't dissipate, kind that becomes action. Walker looked at her. "Lieutenant Collins, anything to add?" She stood. 22 sets of eyes came to her with an attention that was entirely different from the assessment she had walked into 2 weeks ago. Then she had been an unknown quantity, a command decision nobody had requested, a young female officer in a room full of hardened men who had already decided she didn't belong. Now she was something else. She was still being assessed. But the question had changed. 7 dogs, she said, across 7 installations, still in holding. Some of them have been there for months. The evaluation result and the linchpin documentation give us the basis to challenge every one of those removal recommendations simultaneously. She paused. But challenging them requires someone at each installation who knows what they're looking at. The behavioral profiles in those records look, to anyone who hasn't read the linchpin protocol, like standard aggression cases. Without context, they'll continue to be processed as removal recommendations. "What do you need?" Walker asked. "Access to each facility, either in person or through someone I can brief who can conduct the initial assessment on site." She looked at the room. "I need people who can go in, read the animals, and document what they find using the linchpin protocol as the behavioral framework." The room was quiet for a moment. Then Ramirez said, "I'll go." Torres said, "Me too." 3 more hands went up within 5 seconds. Walker looked at the raised hands. He looked at Avery. Something moved across his face that she had not seen there before in 2 weeks of working beside him. It was brief, and it was genuine. It was the expression of a man who had reassessed something fundamental and was acknowledging that reassessment without making a speech about it. "Coordinate with Lieutenant Collins," he said. "She'll brief the teams this afternoon." She sat down under the table where nobody could see it. Her hand was shaking slightly, not from fear, from the particular physiological response that occurs when something you have been carrying alone for a very long time is suddenly distributed across a room full of people who have chosen to carry it with you. She gave herself 3 seconds. Then she picked up her pen and started writing. The briefings ran from 1400 to 1730, and by the time they were finished, 5 two-person teams had been assigned to 5 of the 7 installations. The remaining 2 were facilities where the dogs had been in holding long enough that immediate in-person assessment was critical, and Walker had already submitted the travel authorizations. The teams would move within 48 hours. Avery built each briefing around the linchpin protocol document and the behavioral framework she had developed over 2 weeks of working with Titan. She was specific. She gave them the exact command sequences that the program had used in the reconditioning process because those sequences were the key. A dog that had been through linchpin would react to them differently than a dog with standard behavioral issues, and that differential reaction was the primary diagnostic indicator. She gave them the physical signals to watch for, the positioning, the ear orientation, the specific pattern of the stress response versus the aggression response, because they looked similar from the outside, but they were entirely different things on the inside, and the difference was the whole argument. Ramirez sat through every briefing. He asked better questions with each one, and by the fifth briefing, his questions were so precise that Avery caught herself thinking that with 6 months of canine experience, he'll be a genuinely excellent handler. She didn't say that out loud, but she thought it. At 1740, after the last team had left, she was alone in the briefing room with Ramirez. He was reviewing the protocol document, making notes in the margin, in the tight, efficient handwriting of someone who retained information by writing it down rather than by reading it repeatedly. She was organizing her own materials. They worked in a companionable silence that would have been unimaginable 2 weeks ago. "Can I ask you something?" Ramirez said. "Yes." He set his pen down. "Your partner. The one who was with Titan when you were in the field." He paused. "You don't have to answer this. His name was Myerswib," she said. She said it the way she had learned to say it over 3 years directly, without the hesitation that used to come with it, because hesitation made it harder, and the name deserved to be said without difficulty. "He was a canine handler. We worked together for 2 years. He was better with Titan than I was in some ways. Titan trusted him completely." She folded a document into her folder. "He was killed in an ambush during our 3rd overseas deployment. The vehicle he was in was hit. Titan pulled him out of the wreckage. He was already gone." She paused. "Titan stayed with him until the extraction team arrived. They had to physically carry Titan away from the body." Ramirez was very still. "When I was at Walter Reed, my first question every day was about Titan. I needed to know he was being looked after. I was told he was in a transition program." Her voice was even, not because she felt even, because she had practiced this enough that even was possible. "When I got out of Walter Reed and tried to find him, I was told the transition program was classified. When I tried to access his records, Marsh denied it. And every time I pushed, the reason changed, but the signature was the same." She closed her folder. "For 11 months I pushed. And for 11 months, a man who had deliberately broken a dog that saved Marcus's body from being alone in a field after an ambush sat behind a desk and signed my denial requests." The silence in the room after she finished was the kind that occurs when words have said everything they can say and more speaking would only diminish it. Ramirez picked up his pen. He set it back down. He looked at her with the expression of a man who had started this conversation thinking he understood the parameters of the situation and had discovered the parameters were considerably larger than he'd thought, not as a formality, as a statement with weight. "Thank you," she said, "also not as a formality." He nodded. He picked up his materials. He was almost at the door when he stopped. He turned around. "What you said to Walker in that first meeting, about whether strength was the only thing that mattered." He paused. "I heard about that from Garcia." "Garcia talks a lot," she said. "Everybody on this base talks. That's how we process things." A small pause. "I want you to know that question mattered. Not because it made Walker think, though it did, because it made me think. And I've been in this work for 12 years without thinking that particular thought." He looked at her steadily. "That's a long time to be missing something important." She looked at him for a moment. "You weren't missing," she said. "You were waiting for evidence. That's different. You can't know something is true until you see it demonstrated. You saw it demonstrated. You responded to the evidence. That's exactly what a good operator does." He looked at her. Something in his face shifted, not dramatically, but permanently. She could tell, the kind of shift that doesn't reverse. "See you tomorrow," he said. "See you tomorrow," she said. He left. She sat alone in the briefing room for a moment. Then she gathered her materials and went to see Titan. He was at the front of his enclosure when she arrived. He had been spending most of his time there, now not pressed against the barrier, the way he had been in those first days when his position at the front still carried an edge of desperation, but comfortably present, resting with the easy confidence of an animal that had decided the front of its space was where it wanted to be. The change in his posture over 2 weeks was something that Garcia had mentioned twice, and Donnelly had noted in his report, and Walker had observed without comment, because Walker was the kind of man who noticed things and kept the noticing private until he decided what to do with it. She sat down. He came to the front of the enclosure and lay down on his side, the way he had been doing at night, with his flank against the chain link and his breathing slow. The teams go out in 48 hours, she told him. 5 installations. 5 dogs at minimum, probably more. She leaned her back against the chain link and felt his warmth through the metal. 7 installations total. The 2 I'm most worried about are the ones where the dogs have been in holding the longest. Prolonged isolation on top of the reconditioning protocol. I don't know what that looks like yet. I'm hoping it looks like you damaged but not destroyed. I'm choosing to believe it looks like you. His breathing was steady against her back. The investigation is going to take time, she said. Months, probably. The military doesn't move fast when it's investigating itself. Marsh will have lawyers. There will be procedural challenges. The program documentation will be reviewed and contested and reviewed again. She paused. But the evaluation result is on record. The linchpin protocol is on record. Donnelly's report is on record. And those things don't go away. She was quiet for a moment. Marcus would have liked this part, she said. The part where the SEALs are the ones going in to bring the dogs home. He would have thought that was exactly right. She paused. He always said the only thing he trusted more than a good dog was a good team. He had both with you and with this unit. He just didn't get long enough to enjoy it. The facility was quiet around her. The other dogs in their enclosures. The low overnight lights. The particular stillness of a military base after the operational day has ended, when the machinery of readiness rests and the people inside it are simply people. At 2100, her phone rang. Walker, she stepped away from the enclosure and answered. NSWCOM called, he said without preamble. The linchpin investigation is formally open. They're appointing an independent review officer. The review will cover all 14 subjects, all 7 installations, and the full program documentation, including the authorization chain that initiated the program. A pause. Marsh is not the only signature on the original authorization. Collins. He was the base-level supervisor. The program had authorization from 2 levels above him. She was very still. 2 levels above him, she said. Yes. Who? That's what the investigation will determine. His voice was careful, not evasive. The precision of a man who understood the difference between what he knew and what he suspected, and who only spoke from the first category. What I can tell you is that the investigation scope has been expanded beyond what I initially submitted. Significantly expanded. She processed this. The linchpin program had not been Gerald Marsh's initiative. It had been authorized above him, which meant there was a layer of this she had not known about, a layer that Marsh had been the operational face of but had not originated, which meant that the 11 months of denied access requests were not just one bureaucrat protecting his program. They were one bureaucrat following instructions from someone with more authority to issue them. How far above, she asked. I don't have that yet. Another pause. But I have enough to tell you that the full scope of what was done to these animals goes higher than anyone currently realizes. And the review officer they're appointing has clearance and the authority to follow it wherever it leads. She stood in the quiet of the facility and let that land, all the way down, into the place where she had been carrying this for 11 months, the place that had been dark and cold and very small for a very long time. It was not finished. It would not be finished for months, but it was open now, fully, officially, irreversibly open. And the thing that had been operating in the dark was now operating in the light, which was where the truth needed to be to do what truth does when it is finally given room. Thank you, Master Chief, she said. Don't thank me, he said. You built the case. My team is going to execute it. That's how this unit operates. A pause. The briefest pause, and in it she heard something that Walker did not say often and possibly had never said in these specific words. You did good work, Collins. Hard work. The kind that doesn't look like work from the outside, because it's quiet and it's patient and people miss it. I don't miss it. She said nothing for a moment. I'll see you at 0600, he said. Yes, Master Chief. He ended the call. She stood alone for a moment. Then she walked back to Titan's enclosure and sat down. He pressed his flank against the chain link. She pressed her hand to it. The warmth moved between them through the metal. The next morning came fast. It always did in a place where there was work to do. Because work compresses time in a particular way, the hours move quickly, and the minutes inside them move at normal speed, so you end up at the end of the day with the sense that the day was short and long simultaneously. Avery had learned to work inside that compression. It was one of the skills that nobody put in a training manual, because nobody had ever found a way to teach it. but it was the skill that separated people who could sustain long operations from people who burned through them. At 0600, Walker had new information. Ramirez was already in the operations building when she arrived. He was at the coffee station with he wasn't drinking, looking at his phone with the expression that meant the phone had something that had reorganized his understanding of the morning. He handed it to her without a word. It was a forwarded message from the review officer appointed by NSW Com. The officer had begun preliminary research into the linchpin authorization chain the previous evening and had found something in the first 4 hours that should have taken 4 days to surface, which told Avery that the review officer was either exceptionally good or had been given something to start from that accelerated the search. The original linchpin program authorization had been signed 23 months ago by a 3-person working group. Marsh was one. The second signature belonged to a retired rear admiral who had left active service 8 months ago. The third signature belonged to a current active duty officer at the rank of captain who is presently serving as deputy director of the Naval K-9 program. The deputy director of the entire Naval K-9 program had co-authorized a protocol that deliberately destroyed military working dogs. She read it twice. She handed Ramirez his phone back. That's why the access requests kept getting denied, she said. It wasn't just Marsh protecting himself. He was protecting someone above him who had the reach to make sure the requests kept going nowhere. Ramirez looked at her. His jaw was set. A captain. Yes, active duty. Currently serving. He was quiet for a moment. This is bigger than we thought. Yes, she said. It is. Walker appeared in the doorway of the operations room. He looked at them. He had his own phone in his hand, which meant he had already seen the same message. The review officer has requested a formal interview with me at 1000, he said. Collins, you're on at 1100. Bring everything. Every document, every access denial record, every piece of the linchpin file. He paused. This is the part where it becomes real, not base level, not unit level, real. She nodded. Are you ready for that? He asked. She thought about Marcus Webb sitting beside Titan in a field overseas, the two of them watching a ridgeline together, the way partners watch things with complete, mutual, unspoken trust. She thought about what it had cost both of them. She thought about 4 dead dogs and 7 more that were still alive and waiting. She thought about a signature that had been written 23 months ago in a meeting room somewhere and had rippled outward into 14 lives and ended 4 of them, and nearly ended Titan's. Yes, she said, I'm ready. Walker looked at her for a long moment. Then he nodded. He walked in the operations room and pulled the door open wider, the gesture of someone making room. Then let's go to work, he said. She walked in. The morning was just beginning. And the truth, all of it, every layer, every signature, every document that had been buried in a classified system while animals suffered, and a soldier filed requests that went nowhere was finally moving in the direction it should have moved 11 months ago, forward into the light where it could not be denied. The review officer's name was Commander Diana Reyes, and she arrived at Naval Special Warfare Center at 0940 on a Thursday morning carrying a briefcase that looked ordinary and contained things that were not. Avery knew her by reputation before she walked through the door. Reyes had conducted 3 major JAG investigations in the past 8 years, 2 of which had resulted in courts-martial, and 1 of which had resulted in a program-level restructuring that reached the Secretary of the Navy's desk. She was 51 years old. She had a law degree from Georgetown and a career that had been built entirely on the premise that the truth was findable if you were willing to follow it past the point where most people stop. She shook Walker's hand first, then Avery's. Her handshake was the handshake of someone who had learned long ago that the first physical exchange between people established a dynamic, and who was deliberate about what dynamic she established. Firm equal no performance. Lieutenant Collins, she said. I've read your access denial records, all 11 of them. Yes, ma'am, Avery said. I want you to know that I read them last night, not this morning. I read them at 2200 because I couldn't stop after the 3rd one. She paused. That's not something I say to every witness. I'm saying it to you because you should know that the record of what you attempted to do for this animal over 11 months is part of the official file now, and it will remain part of the official file permanently. Whatever else this investigation produces, that is already established. Avery held Reyes's gaze and said nothing, because there was nothing she could add to that would improve it. They went into Walker's conference room at 1000. Walker first, then Avery, then Ramirez, who had been asked to join as a unit witness. Reyes set her briefcase on the table and opened it with the methodical efficiency of someone who had done this hundreds of times and had stopped finding theater in the process. She laid out documents in a sequence that told Avery she had already organized the information into a narrative and knew exactly which questions she needed to fill in the gaps. She started with Walker. For 63 minutes, she asked Walker about the unit's history with Titan, the records he had been given when the dog arrived, the documentation discrepancies he had identified, the steps he had taken, and the sequence of events from Avery's arrival to the evaluation result. Walker answered every question with the precise, unembellished directness of a career military officer giving testimony, no speculation, no editorializing, only what he had observed, what he had documented, what he had done, and why. At 11:03, Reyes looked at Walker and said, "One final question, Master Chief. In your assessment, was the removal recommendation for Titan a good faith behavioral evaluation or a deliberate misclassification?" Walker didn't hesitate. "Deliberate misclassification," he said. "The documentation trail supports no other conclusion." Reyes wrote something in her notes. She looked up. "Thank you, Master Chief Walker." Then she looked at Avery. "Lieutenant Collins." For the next 90 minutes, Avery talked. She had been preparing for this in the way that she prepared for everything, not by rehearsing, because rehearsal produced the kind of smooth, frictionless testimony that sounded polished and landed flat. She had prepared by knowing the facts completely and trusting herself to deliver them as they were, which was more than polished. It was real. And real in a room with someone as experienced as Diana Reyes was what mattered. She took Reyes through the beginning, Titan's original training, Marcus Webb, the overseas deployment, the ambush and what came after, Walter Reed and the first requests, the 11 months and the 11 signatures. She spoke about the linchpin protocol and the clinical, precise language she had used in the team briefings, because clinical precision was the appropriate language for a formal interview, and she had learned that precision was not the same as distance. You could be precise and still honest. You could describe a terrible thing in exact terms and not lose the weight of the thing. Reyes asked questions, careful ones. The questions of someone following a thread that had more length to it than the visible part, pulling gently to see how much more came with it. At 12:19, Reyes asked the question that Avery had been expecting since she walked into the room. "Lieutenant Collins, in the 11 months you were filing access requests and receiving denials, did you at any point have specific knowledge that the denials were authorized by anyone above Dr. Marsh's level?" "No, ma'am. I knew the denials were being signed by Marsh. I suspected there were operational reasons above his level that were motivating the denials, but I had no documented evidence of the higher authorization until Master Chief Walker pulled the secondary records." "What made you suspect higher authorization?" "Because one person at one installation with one program to protect does not have the administrative reach to sustain 11 consecutive denials across 11 months without someone above him knowing." She paused. "The denials were too consistent, too well-timed. Every time I found a new procedural channel, the denial came back through a slightly different mechanism that happened to close exactly that channel. That kind of responsive blocking requires coordination." Reyes looked at her for a moment. "You understood this during the 11 months?" "Yes, ma'am, and you kept filing anyway." "Yes, ma'am." Reyes wrote something. She was quiet for a moment, and in the quiet Avery could feel the room holding its breath the way rooms do when something significant is being processed. Most people, Reyes said carefully, would have concluded that the coordinated resistance indicated the situation was not winnable and redirected their efforts. "Most people didn't train the dog," Avery said. Reyes looked at her. Something moved in her face, brief, genuine, and quickly managed. "No," she said, "they didn't." At 1300, Reyes closed her notes and looked at Walker. "I need access to the base K9 facility for the remainder of the afternoon, specifically Enclosure 7 and the associated operational records." "You have it," Walker said. "I also need to speak with Dr. Marsh." A pause. "I understand he's currently on administrative hold at his on-base quarters." "Correct. Has he been informed of the investigation scope?" "He's been informed that an investigation is open. The specific scope of the authorization chain review has not been communicated to him directly." Walker paused. "His legal representation was notified this morning." Reyes nodded. She began gathering her documents. "One more thing, Master Chief. The 5 teams you've deployed to the other installations. I need their assessment reports as they come in. Everyone. You'll have them within 24 hours of each assessment," Walker said. She stood. She looked at Avery one more time. Lieutenant Collins, I want to tell you something off the record. Avery looked at her. In 30 years of military legal work, I have seen many cases where someone did the right thing at significant personal and professional cost for a sustained period of time. In most of those cases, the person doing the right thing had some advantage, rank, connections, institutional support, public attention. Reyes paused. You had none of those. You had a denied record request and a dog in an enclosure and 11 months of closed doors. Another pause. That is not a small thing. I want you to know that I see it clearly. Avery said, thank you, Commander. Reyes picked up her briefcase and walked out. Walker looked at Avery across the conference table. Ramirez looked at her from his seat. Nobody said anything for a moment. Then Ramirez said, she's going to dismantle the whole program. Yes, Walker said. I believe she is. The first field assessment report came in at 1722 from Torres and Kim, who had gone to Naval Base Kitsap in Washington. The subject was a 5-year-old Malinois, named in the records as Subject 9, who had been in behavioral holding for 4 months with a removal recommendation pending final authorization. Torres's report was 6 pages. The first paragraph read, Subject Sib's classic linchpin stress response pattern. No aggression initiated from unprovoked contact. Reactive only to specific command sequences matching protocol documentation. Assessment deliberate misclassification. Recommend immediate removal from holding and reassignment to linchpin recovery protocol. Walker forwarded it to Reyes within 3 minutes of receiving it. She responded in under 2 minutes. 3 words. Keep them coming. The second report arrived at 2000 from the team at Naval Air Station Oceana in Virginia. Same pattern, same diagnosis, different dog, same story, same signature on the original removal recommendation. Not Marsh's signature this time. Someone else in the authorization chain. Someone whose name was now in Reyes's file and would spend the next several months being very carefully examined. Avery was in the K-9 facility when the reports started coming in. Ramirez was with her not because he needed to be, but because he had developed the habit of ending his days there, in the corridor outside the enclosure wing, reviewing reports or making notes, or sometimes just sitting quietly in a way that told her he was processing the larger shape of things. She had stopped finding it surprising. Some people needed silence to think, and the K-9 facility had a particular quality of silence that was useful for thinking. She was working with Titan on the extended compliance sequences she had been building since the evaluation. The formal assessment was done. The removal order was stayed. Titan was, as of Donnelly's report, officially operational. But operational and restored were not the same thing, and she was not interested in stopping at operational. She was interested in taking him all the way back to the animal he had been before linchpin, the one that Torres and Kim and Vasquez had glimpsed during the evaluation, the one that had pulled a wounded soldier through smoke and fire because it was his partner, and there was no version of reality where he left his partner behind. She ran the sequences. Titan moved through them with increasing fluency, each session adding precision to the responses that had been disrupted by the reconditioning protocol, the hesitations compressing, the compliance becoming less considered and more instinctive. Instinct in a trained dog was the evidence of deep learning, the stage beyond conscious response where the behavior had been internalized completely. He was getting there. At 21:15, her phone rang. Not Walker, not Ramirez. A number she did not recognize with a Virginia area code. She answered, Lieutenant Collins. The voice was male, older, with the cadence of someone accustomed to being listened to. My name is Admiral James Carver. I'm calling from Naval Special Warfare Command. She was very still. I've been briefed on the situation at your installation and on Commander Reyes's preliminary findings. I want to speak with you directly. A pause. Are you somewhere you can talk? Yes, sir, she said. Ramirez looked up from his documents. She held up a hand and he went still. I want to tell you 3 things, Carver said. First, the linchpin program authorization chain extends to the level of captain, as I understand you were informed this morning. What you were not informed, because we did not yet have confirmation, is that the program also received informal support from a rear admiral who is currently retired. The investigation will address both. A pause. Second, based on Commander Reyes's preliminary report and the assessment results coming in from your unit's deployed teams, I am personally requesting that the investigation be formally elevated to a full Naval Inspector General review. That request will be submitted tomorrow morning. She absorbed this. Naval Inspector General. That was 3 levels above what Walker had submitted to NSWCOM. That was the kind of review that reached places most investigations never touched. Third, Carver said, the K9 program at your installation will be restructured pending the investigation outcome. The restructuring will be led by the specialist currently assigned to the unit. That is you, Lieutenant Collins, if you're willing to take it. She looked at Titan, who was watching her from 3 feet away with the patient. Total attention that he gave her during the moments when she was processing something he couldn't read directly, but could feel in the quality of her presence. Yes, sir, she said. I'm willing. Good. Another pause. I also want to say something that is not part of the formal record of this conversation. What you built in that facility over 9 days with an animal that every expert on that base had declared unrecoverable. That is the kind of work that doesn't usually get recognized properly because the people who do it tend to do it quietly and without seeking recognition. He paused again. I'm recognizing it. She said nothing for a moment. Then the recognition that matters most right now is making sure the 7 animals still in holding come home, sir. A brief silence. Then let's make sure that happens, Carver said. He ended the call. She lowered her phone. Ramirez was watching her. She told him what Carver had said, and she watched his face move through the information with the particular expression he got when something had exceeded the scope of what he had initially believed was possible. Naval IG, he said, yes. That's Collins. That's the whole program. Every install document. Everything. Yes, she said. It is. He looked at Titan. The dog was still watching Avery, still reading the frequency of what had just happened in her voice and her body and the particular quality of her stillness. 4 weeks ago, Ramirez said, I was in Walker's office helping him draft the final removal authorization for this dog. He shook his head slowly. 4 weeks. Things move fast when the truth has somewhere to go, she said. He looked at her. Is that something Diane Holt told you? She almost smiled. No, he did smile then. The full version, genuine and slightly surprised, the same smile she had seen from him exactly once before in the hallway on her first day, when she had said something that caught him off guard. You should write a manual, he said. I already have one, she said. It's in Titan's head. Over the next 3 weeks, the field teams completed their assessments. 7 dogs, 7 installations, 7 reports that arrived in Reyes's inbox and in Walker's operations center with a consistency that built document by document into something that could not be argued away or administratively managed into silence. 6 of the 7 dogs showed the linchpin stress response pattern. One showed a more complex profile that suggested a different protocol variant had been used, which opened a secondary investigative thread that Reyes pursued with the focused efficiency that characterized everything she did. None of the 7 were unrecoverable. That was the word that kept appearing in the assessment reports in different formulations, but with the same meaning. Not broken, not destroyed. Damaged in specific, identifiable ways by a specific, identifiable protocol, which meant the damage had a shape, and things with a shape could be addressed. Ramirez led 2 of the recovery teams himself. He had absorbed enough of Avery's briefings and enough of his own observation time in the facility to conduct initial stabilization work under her remote supervision, and he did it with the methodical patience that she had come to understand was one of his core traits. He wasn't a natural canine handler in the way Marcus had been, but he was disciplined and he listened and he trusted the process, even when the process required him to sit on a concrete floor outside a chain link enclosure before sunrise and do nothing except be present. That was harder for most operators than anything else she asked of them. Ramirez managed it. Torres flew to Kitsap twice. Subject 9, the team had started using their own names for the dogs because names mattered, because the program's clinical designations were part of the problem, was a dog Torres called Archer, and by his second visit, Archer was making contact. Torres texted Avery a photograph of the contact moment and she looked at it for a long time. She did not reply to the text because there was nothing adequate to say. Gerald Marsh was formally charged at the end of the 3rd week. The specific charges included misrepresentation of animal behavioral assessments, obstruction of official access requests, and conspiracy to conceal program documentation, the last charge reflecting the confirmation that his 11 months of denial signatures had been coordinated with the captain, whose name was now very prominently in Reyes's file. His legal representation submitted a response that challenged the jurisdiction of the charges and questioned the validity of the linchpin documentation as evidence. Reyes addressed the jurisdictional challenge in 4 pages and the evidentiary challenge in 6. Both challenges were dismissed within 48 hours. Marsh was placed on administrative separation. He would not return to a military installation in any official capacity. The captain, whose name was Robert Farley, and who had spent the previous 3 weeks consulting his own legal team and reviewing his options, submitted a request to retire effective immediately. The request was denied. His case was folded into the Naval IG review, where it would be addressed in the fullness of time and with the thoroughness that a Naval Inspector General review applied to everything it touched. The retired Rear Admiral issued a public statement through his attorney saying he had not been directly involved in the program's operational implementation and had believed it to be a legitimate research initiative. Reyes, in a meeting with Walker that Avery was present for, described this statement with a single word. She said it quietly and without particular emphasis, and the word was insufficient. Everyone in the room understood what she meant. At 0600 on the morning of the 22nd day after the evaluation, Walker called Avery into his office. She had been awake since 4:30, working in the facility with Titan on the advanced sequences that she was now building toward full operational readiness rather than evaluation-level demonstration. She was tired in the particular functional way that she had been tired for most of the past 3 weeks, the tiredness that exists alongside clarity rather than inside it, the kind that sleep addresses without fully resolving. Walker had coffee waiting. She noted that. He had never had coffee waiting before. "Sit down," he said. This version of the instruction had the tone of the one from the second meeting, not dismissal, but opening. She sat. He looked at his desk for a moment, then at her. "The NSWCOM restructuring plan has been finalized. The base K-9 program director position is formally vacant pending the IG review outcome. The interim leadership structure for the program assigns full operational authority to the unit's K-9 specialist." He paused. "You're the unit's K-9 specialist." "I know," she said, "which means you're running the program. Not just Titan, not just this facility. The full program, all 16 animals, all handler assignments, all operational integration decisions. Under my command, but with full K-9 authority." She looked at him. "I understand. I want to make sure you understand something else." He set down his coffee. "When you walked into my office 22 days ago, I signed off on Titan's removal. I had reviewed the file. I had assessed the situation. I had made a decision, and I was wrong." He said it the way he said everything, directly, without embellishment, without the kind of cushioning that people put around admissions of error to make them more comfortable for the person delivering them. "I don't say that as a formality. I say it because I want you to understand that I know how wrong I was and why, and I have thought carefully about what it means for how I command this unit going forward." She looked at him for a long moment. "You weren't wrong because you missed something obvious," she said. "You were wrong because you were given incomplete information by someone who had authority to make you believe it was complete. That's a different kind of wrong. It doesn't change the outcome," he said, "if you hadn't come when you did. But I did come," she said, "and you listened. When the evidence was there, you followed it. You went to bat for the records. You protected the timeline. You got your team behind it." She paused. "That's what a good commander does. I've worked under commanders who would have dug in on the original decision because changing it felt like losing. You didn't do that." He was quiet for a moment. "You're being generous." "I'm being accurate," she said. "There's a difference." He almost smiled. The same fractional shift she had seen twice before. Ramirez said something similar. "About the difference between things." He paused. "He's been changed by this." "I don't say that lightly. Ramirez has been in this unit for 4 years, and I have watched him operate in significant situations, and he's one of the most consistently disciplined people I have commanded. This situation changed something in him that hadn't been changed before." He looked at her steadily. "I want you to know that I noticed." She said nothing for a moment. "He changed himself," she said. "I just gave him something to respond to." Walker nodded. He picked up his coffee. He was quiet for a moment, and in the quiet, Avery could feel the meeting transitioning from the formal to something else, something that was still professional, but different texture. The texture of two people who had moved through a significant experience together and were now on the other side of it. "Marcus Webb," Walker said. She looked at him. "I pulled his service record last week. Not for the investigation, personally." He paused. "He was decorated 3 times. The last commendation was posthumous." Another pause. "The incident report from the ambush, the part about Titan, about what the dog did." He stopped. He started again. "I have read a great many incident reports in my career. I have read accounts of exceptional things done by people and animals in the field under extreme conditions. That report." He stopped again. I wanted you to know that I read it. She held very still. He was a good man, she said. Yes, Walker said. He was. They sat in the quiet of that for a moment. It was the kind of quiet that honoring someone deserves, unhurried, without agenda, present in the simple fact of acknowledgement. Then Walker set down his coffee and picked up a folder. The transition back to work was seamless. The way it was when two people understood that honoring the past and doing the work of the present were not in conflict. The recovery protocol document you built for the field teams. Reyes wants to formalize it as the program standard across all installations. It needs another revision first, Avery said. The variant they found at Oceana suggests the protocol had at least 2 implementation versions. I need to account for both in the framework. How long? 3 days. You have 4, he said. Use them. She stood. She was at the door when he said Collins. She turned. Titan's full active duty reinstatement is effective 0800 tomorrow morning. He held her gaze. He's back. She looked at Nathan Walker, the man who had laughed at the transfer orders 22 days ago, who had called her a dog girl to his team before she arrived, who had been so completely wrong about so many things and had been big enough to follow the truth when she showed it to him and had used every tool at his disposal to help her when he understood what was at stake. She looked at him and she said, "Thank you, Master Chief." He nodded once, dismissed. She walked out. She went directly to the facility. Titan was at the front of his enclosure, which he always was now, because the back corner was somewhere he had been a long time ago, and he had no reason to go back to it. She opened the enclosure, and he came out and sat beside her with his shoulder against her leg, and she put her hand on the back of his neck and stood there in the quiet of the facility for exactly 1 minute. Tomorrow he was back on active duty. Tonight he was just her partner, and she was just the person who had come back for him. And they were standing together in a place that had tried to take everything from both of them and had failed. Not because they were extraordinary, because they were loyal. And loyalty, she had always believed, was the one thing that could not be broken by any program that any person with any authorization had ever designed. You could damage the behavior. You could fracture the compliance. You could strip the name and bury the documentation and sign 11 denial requests with the same pen. But you could not touch what lived underneath. All of that, the thing that had made a dog walk to the front of his enclosure at 4 in the morning, because something in the air had changed. And what the air was saying was the person he had been waiting for was somewhere nearby. That was not a behavioral trait. That was not a conditioned response. That was Titan. That was Mark. That was what they had all built together years ago in a training facility and in a field overseas, and in the particular, irreplaceable way that a team is built through time and trust and the accumulated weight of choosing each other again and again until the choosing becomes the same as breathing. She stood there until the morning light came through the facility windows and reached the floor beside her feet. Then she straightened up and said quietly to the dog that had waited for her through everything, "Ready?" His ears came forward. She started walking. He walked beside her, just the way it was always supposed to be.